Good afternoon from Washington, D.C. My name is Paul Kincaid. I'm Director of Congressional Outreach here at FMC, the Association of Former Members of Congress. Welcome to the second in a series of 3 student panel discussions co-hosted by FMC and NYU's John Bradamus Center, who advocate for civil debate on politics and public policy. We're delighted to be partnering on this series. Today, the discussion will be a post-election analysis, and we're thrilled to have pulled together an extraordinary panel of students to talk about their thoughts and feelings on the 2020 presidential election. With us today, we have Erica Martinez, a senior from Dominican University, Valerie Dakwa, a sophomore from New York University, Alyssa Phipps, a senior at Christopher Newport University, Samaya Taba, a senior from the University of Michigan, and Angela Wang, who recently graduated from the University of Southern California. This is an interactive discussion today, so if you have any questions at any time, simply click the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, fill out your name and your question, and if we choose you, our moderator will call on you to ask your question over audio only to our panel. Again, anytime during the call, just click the Q&A button at the bottom center of your screen. We're fortunate today to have Congresswoman Donna Edwards as our moderator. Ms. Edwards represented Maryland's 4th District from 2008 to 2017, and she was that state's first African-American woman ever elected to the United States Congress. Congresswoman Edwards, thank you for your time today and for moderating. We look forward to an interesting discussion.
Great, thank you so much. And what a great panel we have today. And we're going to just go ahead and get started. This has been an amazing election season. And for those of you who were first-time voters and those of you who are repeat voters, we've never seen an election season like the one that we are still in the process of concluding. So it's great to have these voices with us today. And I think I want to get started by asking each of our panelists to do like I've done and think about what my biggest takeaway is from this election. And I'll tell you mine. My biggest takeaway was that we had a greater number of people voting than we have ever in the history of the United States. And we haven't even finished counting all of the votes from states like New York and California. And so we are easily going to top 150 million votes cast in this election cycle. And so when people say that Americans are apathetic and don't really care, I think that is just hogwash. It just all depends on getting them out to vote and them, stepping up for their own interests. And so why don't we start with Sumaya? Why don't you tell us what your biggest takeaway was for the cycle?
My biggest takeaway, I think, relates to yours. I think for me, it just highlighted, and it's not a hot take at all, how bipolar, the rhetoric has become. And I mean, I think it does show that Americans care a lot. We just care about 2 very different things, and we care very strongly about those things.
Great, thank you. Erica, what was your biggest takeaway?
I would have to say that my biggest takeaway is the participation and the input of so many different sources, not just media, but people everywhere were spreading the word to get out and vote. And I thought that was very impressive.
Great. What about you, Angela?
I would say my biggest takeaway is sort of the interesting relationship between the media and politics nowadays. On one hand, obviously, like previously mentioned, the high level of voter participation this year, I think, was something that was completely unprecedented, and the media has a huge part to play in that. But simultaneously, the amount of misinformation that flies around, as well as the simple inaccuracy of so many pre-election polls really highlights there's a very convoluted relationship between both like media, news, and politics these days.
Great. How about you, Alyssa? And don't feel like you can't repeat something else, because that just means we all might have had the same takeaway.
Yes, of course. So I feel like my biggest takeaway from this election is that our democracy is strong. We had more voters voting for both sides this election, and it just shows how strong our democracy really is.
Excellent. And Valerie, how about you?
I think my point actually connects more to Angela's, where the reason why America has like a higher, greater turnout, it's mostly because of the amount of social activism that we're seeing in the media And alongside the fact that people are now voting out of fear, because we had all of this social activism, the fear that people's rights are being taken away, it pushed more people to go out and vote. And that's what Gen Z, our generation, loves to advocate for. So we were protecting not only our own rights, but the rights of others.
So I'm dating myself, but I came of age in the post-Watergate era. That was my first vote, was after Watergate. And I remember the energy around that and how I felt so strongly that I wanted to be part of the, kind of reform crowd. And so I'm really curious, for your generation, were there particular issues that were motivating young voters? And because I think we saw a higher turnout, we'll look at the data, but I think we saw a higher turnout among your generation as well. So do you think there were issues that were motivating them? Anybody, just jump in.
The first one that comes to my mind is most definitely the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, because after that point, we had set a precedent with Barack Obama that at the time of an election, we're not going to appoint a new Supreme. And the fact that that had changed, and having Amy Coney Barrett, it just pushed people to go and vote even further, especially a lot of women. Because at that point, we knew that her feelings towards women's reproductive rights were so fearful for our own sake that we had to go out and vote.
So that was in your peer group, but Erica, what about you? Were there issues in your, in the people that you were talking to that might have had a different take, or something else different motivated them?
I would have to say that what really was talked about in my group was similar to what was stated before, abortion rights, and also there was a lot of talk about the Affordable Care Act. The idea of having healthcare for all is very big, and especially amidst the pandemic, it's very important. And I think that's what has led a lot of people to go out and vote.
Alyssa, how about you?
From my pool of experience and, the people that I've spoken to in regards to what they felt like was important to them, I feel like a lot of Americans right now are worried about their rights being taken away. And I feel like that's one of the reasons, kind of going off of what Valerie was talking about, but maybe in a different perspective. That's why they went out and voted. And, that's really why they wanted to take an initiative and take a step in getting their rights back as Americans.
Wow. I'm the other thing that interested me, Angela, is that, there was a lot of activism over the course of the summer. I mean, people on the streets, the protests, especially following the death of George Floyd. There were, there seemed to be a high level of anxiety. Did you get that sense among your peers?
I would say I definitely experienced that firsthand, not only for myself, from a lot of my peers as well. I think one of the issues is that nowadays morality and politics are becoming increasingly interlocked. Before, I think a lot of elections, the foremost issues were usually economic, like, different political parties, different people have views on like what's the best course for taxes, what is the best way to pass this sort of bill and policy. And nowadays is kind of echoing what Alyssa and Valerie alluded to. I think the issues that are becoming more prominent in voting involve like your rights, that you fear like you would not be able to live safely in the United States if you did not go out and vote.
Wow. Sumaya, do you have that same sense? You're from Flint, Michigan, right?
Yeah, from the area.
And
Yeah.
so, I'm really curious. I always thought something that would continue to motivate people were the issues around water and safe drinking water in Flint that might motivate people in a different way. So it wasn't a particular issue of, now, but something that people have been living with for a long time. Or maybe I'm wrong about that. And, folks were showing up to vote for all kinds of different reasons.
I mean, I think that's the thing. It's been such like an accumulation of issues. It's like a whole platform that you disagree with. So like it's police reform, it's immigration, it's COVID. Like I don't think it's one issue that like catalyzed it, at least among my circles. It's just been accumulating for 4 years, and it kind of just like burst this election cycle.
Yeah, I know. I know what you're feeling. I mean, even among my peers, I could ask 10 of them why they decided to, to vote in this election. A couple actually who, despite my being in Congress and trying to convince them, had not really been regular voters at all. And they would give me 10 different reasons. And so it was it's been a really interesting election cycle in that way. Do you guys have any questions for each other? Because you're in different places. And I'm wondering if you're thinking that, in your region, things that bubbled up were maybe different from another region.
I actually was wondering, I mean, I'm just assuming that we all have been experiencing the same issues with COVID and the election season. But how have you guys adapted your activism on campus given COVID? Because I mean, we've kind of been hybrid, but everything that I'm involved with, I try to keep it virtual just for safety stuff. So I don't know how you guys have been dealing with that.
I'd say it's exactly the same for NYU, where a good number of our classes are hybrid and some of them are online, but everything is left to being online, doing everything over Zoom and stuff like that, leaving everything to social media. And when it comes to actually gathering, we just don't gather at all. We leave it to social media because we still understand that COVID is still very prevalent. And even though these social matters are very important to us, we still need to keep safe and protect our communities.
I guess to sort of add on to that, I think USC being located in Los Angeles, such a large and vibrant and obviously very diverse city, I think one of the unique aspects of social media activism that I've seen is sort of looping in the local communities that are surrounding LA, that are surrounding USC and the campus, of which there are many, which I think is a very, I think it allows the students to not only bring a unique perspective to the issues that are facing real people outside of our campus, but it also allows people to see perspectives that that I think being insulated in a college campus, we might not necessarily realize of the communities that are immediately outside the campus walls.
Well, we're already starting to get some great questions coming up in the chat, and kind of one of them, I'm wondering. I know it's still early for that, but I'm wondering if we can actually just throw this one question out there live, because it has to do with our conversation earlier. So Bob Lamb, do you want to go ahead and ask your question? Or maybe that's not the way it works.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Oh yeah, I can. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. My name is Bob Lamb. I'm a writer and I teach at NYU. My question is this. Already a bunch of you have spoken with great enthusiasm about the voter turnout this year. I just looked online and the Washington Post suggests, nobody can know a definite figure yet, that the turnout's going to be about 65% of all voting age adults in the United States. I consider that turnout pathetic. So I encourage you to comment on that. It's better than before, but I still think it's pathetic.
Anybody want to take that on?
I guess, oh, sorry. I just wanted to comment that I have studied in some of my courses the percentage rate of people who have gone out to vote. Usually it's very low during the midterms elections, but in the presidential elections, it tends to go up higher. And you are right. Usually you strive for a 60-61%. But even if we only got 65 and you think that's very low, it's very high for us. I think that the problem is just, even though we have all of this propaganda to go out and vote, why are people still staying home? I mean, that's something that we should be addressing more.
I'd like to add on and say I do agree. 65% does not seem like an impressive number, although relatively speaking, for the history of the United States, it's on the very high end. But I would say I think the issues with voter turnout, a lot of them in the United States, the reason the voter turnout is so low is far more due to structural factors, in my opinion. I think the fact that voter registration is very convoluted and often prevents certain people and certain populations from being able to register, even if they have all the qualifications, as well as the fact that election day takes place on a Tuesday and it's usually not a holiday, whereas in several European countries, people get the day off. And I think especially for lower income populations, it's much more difficult to take time off from work to be able to go and vote. So I think we do need to consider a lot of the structural issues and a lot of the policies surrounding voting and elections in the United States that somehow I think often contributes to the suppression or the low voter turnout because people just don't think that they have the time to do it or that it's even worth the effort.
Going off of what Angela said, like, I definitely agree that I wish more people did vote, but however, we did go up over 5% from last year within our voter records. But I also feel like we are in a global pandemic, which I also feel like could have hindered some of our voting. But like I said, I do agree and I do wish that more voters would vote for their rights. However, we were in a global pandemic, which could have caused like kind of lessen the strain. But however, I do know that we did go up a record number from last year. So
Hey, Angela mentioned something that's really interesting, and that is that what happens in other countries. That there are structural reasons that keep people away from the polls. And I know after Watergate, there were all of those reforms to the campaign finance system and a whole bunch of structural reforms that came up as a result of having gone through that. Do you think it's possible that there'll be other kinds of structural reforms for voting in the United States? Like, should there be federal rules around voting? I mean, it's so decentralized now, which is part of the reason that we're, counting votes and counting votes and counting votes. But, election day, a holiday, what other kinds of things do you think could be done that would actually, move voter turnout consistently way above 65%?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things is definitely considering putting aside election day as a way for all citizens in the United States to be able to cast their vote without having to worry about the time. I think another issue that would be I think one of the things that has been brought up is that I think that contributes to low voter turnout is less like willingness, but also intentional voter suppression, and that's something that trails back throughout United States history. I think it would be a lot more helpful if we could have fewer, I think, rules and regulations surrounding voter registration, which I know tends to happen in targeting specific populations in the United States. A lot of, if you're a regular citizen and you never take the time out of your day to go online, it's very difficult to understand how you have to register to vote. And there are a lot of regulations surrounding how far in advance you have to do it, as well as deadlines that vary widely by different states as to how late you can register before you're even allowed to vote. I think we remove a lot of the regulations and a lot of the, I think, unnecessary complications surrounding a person's path to vote while still maintaining the structures that allow for a democratic system. It would help in terms of ensuring that fewer voters who want to vote, who want to be able to show up and vote for their rights and cast their opinion, are prevented from doing so.
Anybody else have any thoughts about those kind of structural changes that might, I mean, what would have made your voting experience a little bit easier?
From my opinion, going off of what Angela was saying, I feel like not only is it hindrance the day that you can vote, like it being a national holiday, but I would also ask, like, is the process or the way of voting, should it be like one standard in the US so that states are fair and equitable? Or like, do you think it's just simply the structure of the day that you could vote?
Very interesting. Sumaya, did you have a point you were going to make?
Yeah, there were two things. One, I think just having that day off is really huge. At least as students, the time you have if you want to vote in person is completely dependent on like professors individually. Like my university doesn't have a policy. So one person can cancel class and someone else is like, I don't care, you have to come to class. The other thing too, I think, I mean, one, obviously structural reform, but also just having some sort of standardization. I know a lot of issues for my friends that were out of state. They didn't know you could, do same day registration. They didn't, like, someone went into their Secretary of State and was like, oh, I want to do early voting in Michigan. And the Secretary of State was like, we don't do that. Instead of asking for like an absentee ballot. So it's just kind of like, the small intricacies that can stop someone from voting.
How did you all vote? Valerie, how did you vote?
I got an absentee ballot from the state of New York. So basically what happened was that I had to change my address because my parents wanted me to stay with my family in New York. So I was no longer a citizen of Michigan. So I had to get one from there. And I casted my ballot probably 2 to 3 weeks before the election. But another thing about Michigan is that if it is your first year voting, you cannot vote absentee. So that is another way that it deters people from voting in the state.
Wow, and those are different rules for every state. Erica, how did you vote?
I actually voted by mail. I believe I got my ballot very early, sometime in October, and as soon as I got it, I filled it out and put it in the mailbox. But I do agree with what has been said. I also think that something that could really help boost the numbers in voters is transportation. I know my professor always says this, but he lived in Cleveland, Ohio, and he said if it rains, people aren't going to go vote because the buses are never on time. So if we really want to increase the number of voters, I think that transportation would be a really good thing to just mobilize the people and get them to the pollings. And I think that would really help.
Wow, so you all have identified some really specific, also based on your own experience, some really specific barriers. I mean, we saw in the chat, a couple of people were, posting that, their 80-year-old, I guess, mother maybe, wasn't able to, an early voting location was miles and miles away. Really big barriers. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the election itself. First of all, how excited were you? And does it make a difference to you that Senator Kamala Harris, now Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, was on the ballot? Was that motivating to you and your peers or not? And what do you think that portends for the future? Anybody jump in?
I think it set a new precedent because before, when Hillary Clinton was running for president, she was running as the first female president. And up until that point, we had already had our first Black male president. So saying that now we are going to have a woman in office because Hillary Clinton didn't make it to president, it gives us a chance to allow other people to join in the political process, gives people more options, and it allows like little girls to believe that they can be president too if they've already had a female VP who is not only Black, but she is also Indian.
Do you all think you can be president? I hope so. Anyone else want to chime in on that one?
I guess just building off of what Valerie said, I think there's a huge difference between telling girls you can be anything you want. You can even enter the White House one day, and being able to point and say, look, there's a woman who looks like you who has been in the White House already.
Yeah, I think for me personally, I've moved beyond where I need to like physically see someone do something before I can believe I can do it. Cause I'm just like, I'm not gonna wait for the first like Muslim woman to be in office before I'm like, I'm gonna go for it. But I think it does make a much bigger difference to younger girls to see a woman of color in such a high position.
Alyssa, I see you nodding your head.
I definitely agree with what Samaya said. I feel like no matter what, seeing a woman become the first vice president, I definitely agree that it motivates women, but I also feel that strong leaders don't need to see someone to validate that they have the opportunity to do the same thing. And kind of going off what Samaya said, I wouldn't really need to see that in order to know that it's possible. And I feel like all women should know that they don't need to see that in order for it to be possible.
I mean, it's not to like to say it's not validating. Yeah, it's extremely validating to see that.
I'd respectfully like to disagree with that because as we continue to see we already have so few women in places of power, especially in the House and the Senate, and now in the White House. Having people there, it gets politicians comfortable with the fact that we are going to be having more women filling up these spaces. And having these women fill up the spaces already allows us to feel more comfortable trying to pursue those goals.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting point that you bring up, Valerie, because when you think about the House of Representatives, for example, where I served, I think right now there are maybe 23% of the House are women. Well, there are 435 members in the House. So 23%, that's a great high water mark, but I mean, it's not 51%. I'm really interested, we've talked about, what was motivating you and others and your peers to vote. What we haven't, and, kind of why, what we haven't talked about is, what do you think? People talk about the 100-day, plan that every president comes in and their first 100 days is really important. What do you think should be at the top of the agenda for the Biden-Harris administration in their first 100 days?
That's a huge question. And I think that's one that everyone's trying to answer, including the Biden administration. I don't know that there's one issue that I can pinpoint and be like, this is the most important to me. Like, I'm very passionate about our foreign policy, also about immigration, raising the refugee cap, getting COVID under control. I mean, I think it's a tall order, and I'm excited to see what Biden's administration is going to come up with.
I think I would just like to say I know Biden has rolled out a lot of initiatives that he hopes to implement as soon as possible. And obviously there is a lot of work to be done in our country, but I think it would be more prudent to sort of focus on one issue at a time and sort of devote to quality rather than quantity. I think some of the most pressing issues are obviously the issue of combating the COVID-19 pandemic in the United States, as well as the economic fallout and the economic repercussions that have resulted from the pandemic. I would say those are probably two of the most pressing issues that should be dealt with during the 100 days.
I feel like Biden ran on a really heavy policy focused campaign. And in order to be able to start with those public policy promotions, it definitely needs to be dealt with COVID-19 first. And I feel like in the first 100 days, that has to be kept under control in order to move forward with any other policy and actions.
Erica, do you have any thoughts about that?
I also wanted to add that, Biden ran a big campaign on reuniting the country to save the soul of America, especially after all the protests that we've seen and all of the divides that we've seen just these last 4 years and even more beyond that. I think that he's going to try really hard to unite us. And it's a hope that we can hold on to, that democracy in America is still alive and that we can still strive to be better.
Valerie, do you have some thoughts about, even if all of these things are true and there's a really significant policy agenda and Biden wants to unite the country and tackle COVID-19, there's a slimmer majority for Democrats in the House of Representatives. We don't know yet what the split is going to be in the Senate, depending on how those runoff elections turn out in Georgia in January. What do you think if Biden were calling you, if President-elect Biden were calling you today, you're his chief advisor, and he wants to know from you, what do I need to do and how can I do it in a way to bring on Republicans in this divided government? What would you tell him?
I would tell him he would have to address the issues that are closer to the hearts of Republicans, or especially the Republicans that voted for Trump, where you see that most of them have issues with the fact that we continuously shut down the country for the health of others, but they don't really understand why we tend to do that, because they look at other countries and see how they're doing. And it's because they operate in a monolith type of action, where you see countries like Sweden, where they said oh, we're going to be operating the entire time, basically like normal, but you're not going to be interacting with the sick and elderly. But if you continue to do what we're doing here, where half of us are quarantining while the other half is doing whatever they want, we're going to continue to have the COVID crisis. So if he is able to come to a conclusion with that specific group of people, then we'd see more people following rules, and then we could probably solve this crisis somewhat quicker.
All right, so each of you gets to be an advisor, a chief advisor to President-elect Biden. What do you tell him, Alyssa?
You know, I think that's a really deep question, and it's got a lot to go to further answer it. But I feel like it all goes back to the pandemic right now and how you keep that under control, but still allowing for the world to kind of feel normal. I'm not saying right away, but I feel like neither side is going to ever come to an agreement regarding how the first 100 days should start unless it has some realm of, sensitivity to the pandemic.
Do you all think that your Gen Z is going to have a place in the administration? Like, who carries that? If you were to put your ideal person, with President Biden, who would that be? I mean, who would be the person you'd say he'd have around him who really represents your generation? Any ideas? Anybody in the public sphere that even meets that criteria?
I mean, I think for a lot of people who are struggling, or students who are struggling with student debt, anyone like Bernie or AOC who's talking about debt forgiveness, which he's adopted some of those policies. Those are people I'd want to be influencing Biden. But I don't know that there's one figure who represents our entire generation. I think just like looking at this panel, we share a lot of values, but we definitely disagree on these topics a little bit.
Erica?
I think she's a great role model right now, but I would have to say Greta. I don't know how to pronounce her last name correctly. Thornburg.
Oh, Greta Thunberg. Yeah.
Yes, just because she is making us even more aware about the effects of climate change and how it's affecting all of us. And I know that Biden has said before that he plans to go back into the Paris Accords, which is hopefully something that will help us all, because this is not just a problem in America, it's a problem worldwide.
Interesting. Angela, is there somebody that you think should have Biden's ear who represents your generation?
I will have to say, I don't think there's a specific person, at least, that comes to my mind in terms of who would be best to represent our generation, because kind of like what Sumaya said, our generation is so different. The entire United States, we have a lot of common identity groups, people who share values, people who share backgrounds. But at the end of the day, America has so many different groups with so many different perspectives. And it's very difficult to find a single person that would be able to represent all of them. And I think that's why our democracy, the structures of our democracy are so important, because it's not up to, I think, a single figure who would be best able to advise the president as to how to represent our generation, but more the president's responsibility to listen to perspectives and voices across all members of this, across all members of our generation, across the entire political spectrum and other identity groups, as to how to best proceed towards the best actions for the whole country.
Well, one of the questions that came up in the, I can't tell whether it's in the chat or the question box, was actually generated because of something that Sumaya said, and it has to do with values and sharing values. What do you think those shared values are? And do you think that they cross political spectrums, or is this just within, one side of the dynamic? Sumaya, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, no, I saw that question and I was just thinking about that. Most of the values we say, we obviously all care about human rights. We care about civil liberties and freedoms. It's just the way we think we're best going to achieve that we differ on. And recently it's been going completely opposite directions. But I think we do all believe we share those same values.
Are there other values that you think, are kind of a common platform for the United States, in the United States?
To be honest, I would like to say that I would think Democrats and Republicans both have, I guess, the common value of just improving our country. And theoretically speaking, both parties should be working together towards doing that. But unfortunately, as I guess, reality of our bipartisan system is that I think a lot of the people nowadays tend to sort of work against each other. Politics has become almost like a football game in which Democrats and Republicans are two opposing teams playing against each other, trying to overturn each other's policies instead of working together for the future of our entire country as one unit.
Do you think coming out of this election that there will be Democrats and Republicans who are able to work together? I mean, do you have any confidence in that? Anybody? Valerie, you just sat back. What do you think?
I definitely think that is a possibility. I think with the higher number of classical Republicans that we have, the ones that ended up not voting for Trump, it will be closer to get them alongside the side of Democrats.
Do you think they're in the halls of Congress? Do you think any of them are in the halls of Congress?
I think maybe we'll see them after Trump leaves. They'll make themselves a bit more known.
Alyssa, what do you think? Do you think that there are, the ways that Democrats and Republicans are issues on which they'll be able to work together in the coming year and 4 years of the Biden presidency?
I definitely think there is ways that they can come together and unite, and I feel like that starts with the president, and I think that starts with the president crossing lines, and I don't feel that currently they are being crossed, and I hope Biden can cross those lines to unite the United States and heal. But I do definitely believe that we can come together and find bipartisan solutions that maybe both sides would be happy with on common ground.
Do you think that's a reason that people chose to vote for Joe Biden, because they believed that he had the ability to cross those lines, because people are want some kind of bipartisanship or working together, and they thought he stood the best chance of doing that? Do you think that was up underneath some of these votes?
I definitely do think it was underneath those votes, and I think that some Americans, whether they are Trump supporters or not, we're tired of the constant rhetoric, and I think that might have been what has caused those votes to maybe shift a little bit. And so I think that's what the bipartisans coming to.
Yeah.
think
Go ahead, Angela. Go ahead.
I was just going to add on a little bit to what Alyssa said previously. I actually think a lot of the sort of crossing party lines, obviously, like the president being able to do that is important, but I think a lot of the unity between Democrats and Republicans actually starts like at the individual, at the citizen level, less from the White House, but from like us being able to talk with our friends with political perspectives who are different from us, and not having that result in a screaming match. I think it involves like people willing to listen to people from political parties who are different from them, who may have political perspectives that they may even regard as like immoral or completely wrong, and be able to understand the reasoning behind them. And I think the idea of being able to cross party lines starts from being able to hold constructive conversations across those party lines, whether or not that actually results in some sort of collaboration on a policy. I think it's really important to start with listening to different perspectives and realizing that we all live in the same country, and at the end of the day, we all want the same thing, a better future for everyone, even if we do have different perspectives on how to achieve that.
Do you think at all that, if you see that modeled in the White House, then that can have some effect in places like on college campuses, within families and communities? It makes me wonder how much the presidency itself can have the impact of modeling that for the rest of us to kind of lower the temperature a bit. Has that crossed your minds? And
Yeah, can I jump in right here?
yeah,
I
go
think
ahead.
having it in the presidency, definitely it sets a precedent, but I think it's just a reflection of civil society, like 50%, give or take, of the US voted for this person in office, which means they, you know, they share those values. They're okay with that kind of like rhetoric. So I think having that kind of like personality in office is a reflection of our current state, but I think it legitimizes that stance. So I think it is really important that we have someone in office who is not okay with that kind of rhetoric, who's at least attempting to bridge that divide, as of course we work on ourselves individually.
Anybody else have thoughts about that?
You know, I
Go
have a thought. I think it definitely does start, I forgot who said it, but I definitely do think it starts at, you know, a citizen level, but I feel like it really can't start at a citizen level unless the presidency models that. And I feel like, you know, if the president isn't speaking to the Speaker of the House, like how can the citizens really listen if they don't have a model? And I feel like without having a model, that's where it starts. And, you know, I think citizens should do it no matter what. And I'm always open for constructive conversation, but I do think it starts with the presidency.
Great. You know what? I think we've had a number of questions throughout the Q&A box. And so what I'm going to do is for the people who have said that they want to ask their question or have their question answered live, I can't figure that out. What I'm going to do is Daniel Reagan, you had a question. Why don't you stab at it?
Hi, first of all, thanks for your time and your thoughtful observations and comments. I'm a political science professor at a university in Indiana, and I'm teaching an intro class right now. And one of the things I think my class would like to know from your perspective, did anything in the election results surprise you, catch you off guard?
Great question. Thanks, Daniel. Anybody want to think about that?
I mean, I think to an extent, I was prepared that it was going to be a longer election with the number of mail-in ballots, and that it was going to be a little tight. And I knew, you know, some states were going to be contested. We're going to have some recounts. I didn't think it was going to take this long, and I didn't think it was going to be this close. And I think that someone mentioned the polls earlier, and how those just were not that accurate this election cycle. And I think that really threw me off.
Any other surprises?
I was thoroughly confused when Donald Trump started suing states that were part of the blue wall, that were originally blue in 2012, 2008, and before that he had only gotten 2016, and they returned blue. Why was he so surprised that they would go back? But also I was confused with the fact that so many people thought that Florida was also going to turn blue. Florida historically has been red. And even though we have these big metropolitan areas like Orlando, Miami, Tallahassee, it's not going to be large enough to overthrow the rest of the state.
Any other surprises? Great. I have to tell you, I was actually surprised. I thought a larger part of the electorate or the voting electorate would actually reject the president. And I was, you know, surprised, I don't know, that wasn't true, because I was thinking about how difficult that could make governing. We have a question here from, let me just, you'll pardon me, I'm like, you know, trying to go up here. Let me try to find one live here. Leslie Walker, I think you have a question. Are you still with us, Leslie?
Hi, I'm here. I'm 72 years old, and I was angry and frustrated, and I found a group to work with to be helpful, and that's Elders Stand for Fair Elections. And we reached over 1 million people in 8 states by working through congregations and universities and community health centers and elder and senior facilities to get out the vote. But we are still meeting because we don't believe that it's over yet. That voting is just one phase of an election, and there are many other dates and actions that Trump can take to win. So I'm still afraid, and I wondered if you are too, and what we can do.
Thank you very much. Any thoughts about that from any of our panelists? Are you still afraid?
I mean, I think there's still a degree of uncertainty. Like I don't know. Like I haven't kept up. I know there are a lot of lawsuits. I know he still hasn't conceded. But I mean, I personally accepted that, you know, Biden's vice president-elect, and now I'm working on like, how are we going to work with Biden to start policies that we want to see.
Anybody else want to take that on?
I've heard all of these other discussions about paths that Trump could take to regain the presidency. And honestly, I don't think any of them actually have any merit, because when it comes down to the popular vote and the Electoral College, those are what decide who will be president. And not only has President-elect Biden been projected to win both by an astronomical amount to the point where it can't be contested, why would we usurp American democracy to do that? Yes, Donald Trump is a fan of breaking tradition, but this is past the point where everyone can be like, oh, this is another thing that Donald Trump is doing again.
Do you think, I was looking at the what we know to be the Electoral College votes now, and it looks like, I mean, that President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris will end up with exactly the same number of electoral votes as Donald Trump and Michael Pence had in 2016. 306. And so, you know, if you could win by 306 with 306, then you could, you know, lose to somebody who got 306. So it's quite an interesting dynamic in this post-election period. But you all don't have any doubts that on January 20th at noon, Vice President-elect Biden is going to become president, right? Are there any doubts about that on this panel?
I just want to kind of echo what Samaya said, where there is a huge degree of uncertainty right now. And I do understand like this election is very unprecedented. We've never really had one like it before, like taking place in the middle of a pandemic, on top of all things. But as broken as a lot of our democracy sometimes I think tends to seem, I feel like these structures have held up over hundreds of years, and they haven't really failed us now in terms of allowing the American people to elect who is president according to those structures. So rather than feeling fear, I'm trying to learn how to embrace the uncertainty and just be prepared for whatever comes. Hopefully our government, our democratic structures will still be able to prevail.
Well, you know, it's interesting because people, you know, especially before the election, talked a lot about how broken our structures are and processes, and whether this was a real, you know, sort of challenge to the Constitution and the constitutional norms that we've known. And you all seem to be expressing confidence in the constitutional system, and that our systems and structures, the three branches of government, that those are standing the test of time and they're holding up. There's no skepticism among this group about that, right?
I think oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, I think the structures are working as they were meant to. Do I agree, like, in the Electoral College? No, I don't think we should have an Electoral College. I think it should be a popular vote. But I mean, for however many years, whoever won the Electoral College won the presidency. I don't think that's going to change this election.
Yeah, I guess Sumaya basically expressed my exact point. I think the structures are going to determine, based on the rules that we currently have set up in this system, that Biden is most likely going to be elected president, even though I feel like a lot of the regulations and a lot of the systems that we do currently have set in place need to be seriously reformed in order to better reflect the democracy of the United States.
You know, going off of what Angela said, I definitely believe that there's no doubts that President-elect Biden will take office, but that has to be certified by the election and not the media.
Yeah, do you think a point was raised, I think, in either the question and answer or chat around the campaign finance system and the impact of money and what that does to our politics. Do you think that that had a tremendous impact this time? I mean, there were record amounts of money spent in this election to try to influence the electorate. Do you think those are rules that should, get challenged a little bit?
I do. I think there is an issue when a huge factor that contributes to who wins an election, even like before Biden and Trump were the two major candidates from the two political parties, within the Democratic Party and within the Republican Party, there's a huge issue when basically whoever wins the nomination tends to be whoever basically ends up with the most money, whoever has the most money that can afford the best advertisements, the best campaign. And while I think it's going to take a really long time, if ever, that these campaign finance policies can be reformed, I think it's something that needs to be looked into.
Anybody else?
I mean, I agree with Angela. I personally wouldn't know what a system that isn't run like by money looks like. And I know we have some professors of political science who could probably tell us more or send some like recommendations. But I mean, it's ideally something that I would want to see. I just don't know what it looks like.
Yeah, some people have suggested, and I know that when I was in Congress and actually in my professional career, have been a really huge proponent of public funding of elections under the theory that if you don't own them, then somebody else will. But that's never gotten national traction. But that could really change the way what it looks like, and also who runs for office, whether the people who run, have the networks to raise those millions and millions of dollars, or they're just your neighbors who, wake up and say, I think I want, and I think I can be your congressperson or your governor or your president without having to rely on money. We have a question. If Max Ramos, if you want to answer, ask your question, it's a terrific one. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi. So I was just curious because there's a lot of divide between the people in this country, but now that the election's over, you see a lot of divide between party members, and like the biggest examples we're seeing is in the Democratic Party, where certain members of the party are taking credit for parts of the election, and then certain blame is being passed along. What do you think is like, and of course this is not just the one party, I'm sure we're going to be seeing it a lot in the Republican Party too after this election, but what do you think the future is for both the Democratic and Republican Party now that since there's such divide between both parties amongst their members?
Great. Thank you very much, Max. Anybody want to take that one on? Do you think it matters that Democrats, I mean, there have been reports about, the progressive wing of the party having big battles with the with the centrist wing of the Democratic Party, and, a lot of infighting. Do you think that really matters, and how does that impact a Biden presidency?
I think I had read a headline that was like AOC was saying in any other country, her and Biden would not be in the same party. But, she was also campaigning for him. So I think right now, what everyone is looking for is stability. And we haven't gotten that between the two parties. So we're looking for that at least within our own party. I don't know what it looks like if, hopefully when things settle down.
I think this kind of goes a little bit back to our earlier point about the way bipartisanship has turned our government into a football game in which there's a war between two parties. And I think that also contributes to a lot of the conflict within both parties, in which people are trying to take credit for electoral victories, or blaming each other for losing seats in the Senate or the House of Representatives or things like that. And I'm really hoping, to be honest, I guess like this might be sort of overly optimistic, but I'm really hoping that the future of both parties learns how to accommodate this increased diversity of perspectives and backgrounds, rather than sort of shun them and attempt to continue to sort of consolidate each party into like an individual platform, or like a single group with like the entirely similar perspectives. Because I think one of the things that we've seen in this election, more so than others, is how the level of polarization has revealed just the vast diversity of perspectives there actually are across the United States. And my hope for the future of both parties under Biden is that these views that seem to be outliers can be accommodated and absorbed within the parties rather than shunned, so that we can keep like the same coalition.
Valerie, I see you nodding there. What are you thinking?
I think to address Angela's point altogether, we should be focusing more on ranked choice voting. I know that the state of Maine and the state of Michigan are both looking into it. And I think Maine has already had their first election based on ranked choice voting. And it turned out very well, because with this bipartisanship nature, we need to address the fact that we are not sports teams. These are people that we are electing to represent us, represent our ideals. And if we continuously have infighting between our parties and even within our own parties, who is that benefiting? Because the slanderous campaigns that are going against each and every person who is running for political office doesn't help anyone. Bringing out people's dirt against their families doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help the people. It doesn't tell us any more about their policies that are that will be impacting us. It just feeds onto the rational ignorance that will be affecting our communities and leads to more uneducated voters, because voters don't feel the need to actually gain more information on these people.
Great. Erica, have you thought about what it would mean to, how do you rebuild a Republican Party that's so fractured? I mean, and is it necessary? Do we need to have two parties that are equally positioned so they can debate ideas? Is that preferred?
It's really hard to address that. I do think that it would start with a very strong leader who can meet either within the Democratic or the Republican Party, to meet in the middle of that, within that party. It's going to require a lot of unity and a lot of compromise, which is something that people aren't willing to do anymore. Even if we all have the common values, we still need to learn how to compromise.
Great. Well, it turns out that we've almost reached the bewitching hour for these terrific panelists, and a great discussion. And if we didn't get to your question, which I tried to circle down to everything, but you can blame it on my fingers and my eyes, unable to read everything in the question and answer in the chat. But I thought we would close by giving each one of you 30 seconds to tell us what you think, what you hope for 2021. Alyssa, why don't we start with you?
I think for 2021, I just really hope that the rhetoric calms down and both parties can find common ground within leadership, and America can begin to trust and heal again. So that's just my opinion.
Thank you. Erica?
I would say that I hope this country can become more united and go back to our core common values, which is just that everyone can be free, they have their liberties and their rights, and still have the opportunity for a good life.
Excellent. Valerie?
I would say that my goal for 2021 is that the United States moves closer towards repairing our relationships with other countries.
Thank you. Angela?
I would say my hope for 2021 is more focused on small steps, because bipartisanship, the broken structures within our democracy, as well as, like Valerie mentioned, our impaired relationships with other countries, they're not going to get fixed overnight. And I think the key to sort of building gradually towards fixing all the issues that are broken is through small steps, through collaboration on an individual level that eventually expands to the top.
Thank you. Samaya?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to respectful dialogue. That's why, I mean, we can't do any of this if we're not talking nicely to each other.
Excellent. Well, thank you all very much for talking really nicely with each other and for sharing with our audience today. I mean, it's a really, impressive group and, terrific conversation. And I don't know when, but I hope one day I'm going to be able to vote for one of you or somebody in your generation as the next president and vice president-elect of the United States. In the meantime, we'll all just help the next one to do the best job possible. Thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon.